Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today I want to talk about
Chaos.
Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, of course. The release of this game is less than a month away, and I feel like I'm not seeing enough people talking about this upcoming title, so I want to make a few videos covering the details you may have missed, or perhaps that you just chose not to follow after seeing that early trailer. In this video, I want to talk about a touchy topic in the form of downloadable content. Yep, 3 letters that can mean so much good or bad depending on the game. Hey, at least it's not another 3 letters that, for all we know, could stand for not fun time. Anyway, we learned a few months back that Stranger of Paradise would have a season pass, and given the context of the game's story, that certainly left us with a few questions. Well, on February 18th, the official Twitter posted the names of the 3 DLCs in the season pass, and I want to discuss them now. Mind you, I'll definitely need to talk a bit about spoilers for Final Fantasy 1, a little bit of Final Fantasy 5, and maybe even a bit of Final Fantasy 15, so consider this your spoiler warning if you haven't played those games in the last 30 years. So to catch you all up, Stranger of Paradise is an action RPG being developed by Square Enix in collaboration with Koei Tecmo Games and Team Ninja, the same team that brought you the Nioh series, and that definitely shines through in a lot of the gameplay. It's a game about the origin of Final Fantasy's first antagonist, Garland. It's going to explain how Garland would become the primary antagonist of the original Final Fantasy, though the dev team still kinda shies away from actually calling it a prequel, often saying that it uses Final Fantasy 1 as a motif and then mixing that with the message that yes, it is going to be an origin story of some kind. Regardless, that gives us some solid context to judge the 3 DLCs based on their names alone. So DLC number 1 in the season pass is the Trials of the Dragon King. Well, anyone familiar with Final Fantasy 1, or Final Fantasy in general, could probably guess what that means. In the Final Fantasy franchise, the Dragon King, or Worm King, is none other than Bahamut. Whether an ally or a foe, he is a massive threat and one of the franchise's most popular entities. Now, Bahamut did actually appear in the original Final Fantasy. By entering and conquering the Citadel of Trials and claiming the Rat Tail item, a player could then find Bahamut's lair in the Cardia Islands and offer it to him to advance their jobs. This gave them new names, new abilities, and a significant boost of power. You never actually fight Bahamut, and he is friendly to the team, something that is not very common in the later games, but at the very least in this first outing, he's kind of a good guy. I think we'll be seeing a sort of recreation of this side quest for the first DLC. Now, no doubt the Citadel of Trials will be a bit more challenging now than it was way back when, and it's also very likely that Bahamut himself will actually be a boss, unlike in Final Fantasy 1. The real question is, where does this DLC fit in with the story, if at all? Since Jack would go on to become the evil Garland from the original game, reason stands that this DLC would kinda have to take place before that happens, before the end of the game, at least if it's actually trying to fit in the story. If that's the case, it just kinda works out naturally. Bahamut probably doesn't know what Jack becomes and tries to help him get more powerful, though I'd imagine he has to have some inkling that this isn't gonna turn out very well. He's pretty smart in most of the games. I suppose the question is how omniscient they decide to make Bahamut in this game, how trusting he is of Jack and company, and what the actual unlockable content is. Then if it takes place somehow after the end of the story, I don't even know how they're going to swing that, but there's a few ways they could do it. Now, given that we know Stranger of Paradise will have co-op raids and content, it's likely that the Citadel adds on to and encourages that. Given that Bahamut advances jobs, it's also likely we'll see new, stronger jobs emerge here as well. That's pretty nutty, since the base game actually has 27 jobs on release. There's probably going to be new weapons, new armor, and abilities, so I expect this to be a pretty straightforward DLC, not really changing the events of the game itself. Then we come to DLC number 2, and this one is titled Wanderer of the Rift. Now, in all of the Final Fantasy multiverse, the interdimensional rift from Final Fantasy V is generally considered to be the Deus Ex that loosely connects the world, alongside the Void and World B. It is through this rift that 3 entities travel between the various games: Shinryu, Omega, and Gilgamesh. Now, Shinryu and Omega, they got their own thing going on. They're locked in an eternal multiverse game of cat and mouse. Omega's tracking down Shinryu in order to attempt to kill it, and Shinryu just wants to hide in treasure chests and protect strong swords. Don't know why, that's just his thing. While it is likely we will see these two show up, Wanderer of the Rift is a title that actually belongs to our third friend, Gilgamesh. He has traveled across Final Fantasy games after being banished to the Rift in Final Fantasy V, attempting to collect rare weapons and hone his fighting prowess. He's a goofball, but he's our goofball, and he's no slouch in battle. Now, in terms of all these characters in Final Fantasy I, it's actually not the first time they've been invited to the OG's birthday party. In both the Dawn of Souls and 20th anniversary versions of Final Fantasy I, Shinryu, Omega, and Gilgamesh all appear as optional bosses inside of the Lifespring Grotto, an optional dungeon. It's possible this story could take us there, but given the mention of the Rift, I have a feeling they'll sooner just use that as the vessel with which to introduce us. Maybe the Rift is inside the grotto. That would make sense given how it happened in the anniversary editions, but I'm not going to get too hung up on the details. Also, with the Rift being involved, and with the way that optional content actually worked in Final Fantasy I, don't be too surprised if we see some other popular Final Fantasy enemies show up here either. The Rift is always full of surprises, and I expect fan service galore. Now, there are actually some other elements of this that may directly tie into Stranger of Paradise's actual plot, but like I said, I'm going to talk about that in another video, so I'll save my tinfoil hat theories for that. Just know that I expect this DLC will at least function similarly to the previous one, though the super boss status of these opponents leads me to believe they will be more difficult than the enemies you face in the Bahamut DLC. Then we have the final DLC of the Season Pass, and this one's given me Final Fantasy 15 vibes with the title Different Future. The name here seems to suggest that Jack and his companions will likely not become the villains in this outcome, and his transformation to Garland will never take place, completely erasing the events of Final Fantasy I, which for all we know could actually have other implications. Again, saving it for that other video. They could also go the darker route of you playing as Garland and killing the Warriors of Light from Final Fantasy I, but I have a feeling this is more supposed to be the good ending, since we know that Strangers kind of already has a bad ending. I kind of expect it to be the parallel they were going to play with Final Fantasy 15, the second set of DLCs that never got released, where they were going to actually provide a good ending to the game. It's been novelized, but it's not very good. Now for this one, I don't suspect it's going to be about high-end challenges or multiplayer raids or anything like that. I think it's going to be much more story-focused, offering some new content in that regard, but largely focusing on changing the outcome of Jack's actual future. He actually defeats Chaos and saves the world, just like the prophecy led him to believe in the first place. I don't think there's too much to say about this one except please look forward to it. Now, as I said earlier, all three of these DLCs will be part of the game's Season Pass, which will be included in the digital deluxe version of the game. You'll also be able to purchase it separately later, but they haven't really announced too much in the way of details for that. Pre-ordering the game does also get you early access, the Rebellion weapon, Braveheart weapon, and Illustrious shield, a PS4 theme, and then of course the digital deluxe is a few other bonus things, art book, mini soundtrack, and then there's even a soundtrack that's available for pre-order right now, the full soundtrack that I'm also very much looking forward to. Now, normally, announcing DLCs before a game comes out isn't something I too much enjoy, but it happens to be in a type of game, the Souls-like, or in this case more than Nioh's-like, where I almost always want DLC for these types of games. So if Team Ninja can nail this one, this is going to mean a long life and a fun time for Stranger of Paradise when it releases on all the various platforms that it will be releasing for. I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to it, and I'm especially looking forward to making that story tinfoil hat theory video. A theory that I actually shut down about a year ago when the game was first announced, but now I might just be on board. Anyway, with that, thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think about Stranger of Paradise, if you're excited for it, if you want more information, if there's still things you're waiting to hear about, put it in the comment section of the video below. With that, I'll see you all in the next video, and until then, take care.